Genius is a gift and a curse. We praise the brilliant minds of our past and present who bring good and change to the world, but genius can also breed madness and destruction. It is from genius that dark things can be born, and nowhere is this highlighted better than in the mad genius that is Herman Carter, the Doctor. Welcome, my friends, back to the fog, a twisted realm of death and fear, a world where a mad god pits bloodthirsty killers against desperate survivors in an endless game of life and death, all for his own sick amusement. The entity has recruited many monsters for his purposes. Some of them were made monsters by external forces. Some were always sadistic and evil from birth, and others were brilliant men with bright futures, but who had a slight touch of madness to them. From the time he was a child, Herman Carter understood the mind. He was gifted at understanding how people thought, getting them to respond the way he wanted, and predicting people's actions and decisions. He would experiment with ways of invoking responses, such as playing music at certain frequencies and in certain patterns to evoke subliminal responses from his parents. And they worked. His skills didn't go unnoticed. He was admitted into an advanced neuroscience program in a black site facility in Illinois known as Larry's Memorial Institute, which was actually a front for the CIA. Here, specialists like him were taught interrogation techniques to get information from spies. And Herman was excited at first, but his excitement faded quickly as he realized how weak-willed his superiors were. Limitations. Always limitations. You see, they couldn't actually hurt anyone. Professor Blankard, this supervisor, had him partnered up with another student, and their job was to extract secret words from a group of other students playing the role of spies. They had a limited few days to get the information, and Herman knew how to get them talking. But they were too restricted, held back, told to play good doctor and bad doctor. What a waste of time. You see, the students knew that they would never do anything to really hurt them. So, it was limitations again. So therefore Herman took matters into his own hands. He struck his partner in the back of the head to knock him out, and then began his horrifying work. He had all of his subjects screaming their secret words at him in a matter of hours. But he still had a few days, so why not experiment? The sheep are his to play with. Using music, drugs, drinks, and all manner of new toys, Carter goes to work. He begins remothering his little sheep. His favorite tactic is electrocution. He splits apart lamp wire and shoves them into the mouths of his victims. He breaks them, remolds them, crafts them, breaks them again. How good it feels to be free. True freedom comes when one breaks the shackles of morality and ethics. What do codes and rules do but hold you back from true discovery and invention? He begins experimenting on the brain. Using crude kitchen knives, he plays with the brains like a child with Legos. For a whole week he indulges in sadistic, horrifying, and unspeakable acts of experimentation on their minds. With the week close to done, it's time to cover his trail. He performs an experiment on the good doctor. His programmed a neurological conditioning into him. When he speaks a certain phrase, his partner will think that all the students are Russian spies in need of execution. And when good doctor comes around, Herman speaks the phrase, put his hand on his partner, and hands him a spoon. After all, Herman's never seen murder by spoon before. This would be most educational. And with the deed done, Professor Blankard arrives to see the damage. Herman explains sadly how his partner went mad and he barely escaped. But to his surprise, Blankard looks unmoved. He explains he saw everything by means of a hidden camera. He knows the truth. But there's no anger, no revulsion. In fact, the professor smiles. This was what Blankard had wanted. He'd given Carter the chance to unleash hell, and he took it. It was this monstrosity and willingness to break people that he needed. Herman Carter was accepted right away.
Hey! Huh?
From there, Herman Carter became known as the Doctor. Prisoners and spies begged, pleaded not to be taken to his office. Often when the Doctor performed his work, He would lock the doors and guards would pretend they couldn't hear the screams, the sobs, the pleading. But over time, Carter's superiors became nervous of him as well. His cunning and willingness to experiment and torture went beyond the need of duty, and sometimes his subjects disappeared, and no one knew where they went. However, after the Institute went silent for a week, an investigation was held, and the truth was discovered. All the personnel, staff, and prisoners were found dead with unspeakable head and brain trauma. The only man missing was Herman Carter, taken to places unknown. The doctor's lore I find actually kind of disgusting, but in a good way. It made me uneasy and frightened. I've never liked hospitals or doctors' offices. They make me uneasy. I've been in them too often. The idea of one of these doctors going mad and pushing the limits of his medical understanding to a frightening and deadly place, that's mortifying. I remember having nightmares about mad doctors experimenting on me. It's not something I recommend. Carter embodies the traits of a psychopath. He feels nothing for anyone and only feels joy at discovery. Lives have no meaning to him, only the pain and changes he can inflict in them. It's disturbing to the highest degree, and it works very well for this overall lore. He makes an excellent killer for the entity. Now, the Doctor's power is called Carter's Spark. Through unknown means, the entity has given Carter the power to emit his electroconvulsive powers at will, almost Palpatine style. But this lightning doesn't harm the survivors, not physically anyway, but mentally. This power, like Carter does, will break them. Being struck by the Doctor's powers will cause all survivors to suffer from madness for the duration of the trial. Now, madness has 3 tiers of effect, each tier applying worsening ailments. In the first tier, survivors scream each time their tier escalates, and their skill checks on all actions have a 33% chance of being madness skill checks, which is where the skill check indicator moves or reverses its trajectory to throw off the survivor. At the second tier, the madness skill checks become more common at 66% regularity, and their survivor will also occasionally see hallucinations of the Doctor standing near them. At tier 3, the survivor will scream intermittently. They can no longer use their items or interact with props in the environment. All skill checks become madness skill checks, and hallucinations of Doctors not only appear regularly, but the Doctor can see where they appear. Once a survivor hits tier 3, they can regress back to tier 1 by performing a snap out of it animation. However, this action takes time and holds the survivor in place. Now, the Doctor has 2 forms of electrical attacks. Shock therapy allows the Doctor to release a cone-shaped electric shock along the ground directly in front of him. If struck, the survivor's madness will increase halfway to the next tier and will scream if they increase to the next tier. It will interrupt any current action they are taking and will prevent them from vaulting or dropping pallets for the next 2.5 seconds. But note that shock therapy does not give you the madness status effect. It can only increase it if they already have it. Static blast can only be activated when the power gauge is filled. When activated, the Doctor releases a static charge that goes out to this entire terror radius, shocking everyone within its reach. Those impacted have their madness increased by 1 tier and making them scream, revealing themselves and interrupts any action they are currently taking. But the blast does have a cooldown of 60 seconds. This power is nothing short of, well, maddening. A status effect that can't be removed but only managed, and that has the potential to constantly expose yourself to the killer. As a survivor, when I know I'm fighting a Doctor, I just try to make him work for it, really. The Doctor's incredibly dangerous with this power, and while the electrocution won't physically hurt, it can hinder your ability to counter him. This is probably the greatest problem in fighting the Doctor. It's not that his power does damage, it's that he makes combating him take even more effort. You spend more time trying to resist his madness than you do performing actions, and this only gets harder with the Doctor's perks. The Doctor's 3 perks are Overwhelming Presence, Monitor and Abuse, and Overcharge. Overwhelming Presence, unfortunately, is rather situational. Survivors within their terror radius who use items have the depletion rate increased as much as 100%. And this is nice if you have a team of survivors all relying on toolboxes and medkits, but unfortunately, most toolboxes are wasted by the beginning of the trial. Flashlights seem to never run out of power, and medkits would likely be the only thing affected. Good thing survivors have enough perks to save themselves if they get injured, so I very rarely used overwhelming presence. Monitor and abuse is a little more useful. Your tear radius is increased by 8 meters, but not in a chase. It's reduced by 16 meters, while your field of view is increased by 10%. This allows the doctors to more easily hunt down their prey, as survivors are more likely to be active when they don't hear a tear radius nearby. It also goes well with the static blast, as the larger radius in the chase will catch more survivors. And then overcharge, though, is probably the most useful and used by other killers. When you break a generator, it becomes affected with overcharge. The regression speed on that generator is increased to 200% for 30 seconds. When the next survivor tries to fix a generator, they will face a difficult skill check. If they succeed, it will not add any benefit other than the generator will not explode. But failing it will not only cause an explosion, but a further progression loss of 5% at most. Imagine how maddening that must be. Madness is not always the absence of reason and intelligence, but rather reason and intelligence pushed to its most terrifying and most cruel. The doctor is certainly insane, but he's not unintelligent or wild. Rather, he's cold, cunning, and incredibly brilliant. As his cold laugh fills the night, remember that madness is drawing ever closer, and it will claim you without remorse, without pity, and worse, without hope. Thank you for joining me in the fog, and I will see you in my next video. Take care.
That wasn't the smartest decision. A person should value his life above all else. But it's too late for regrets, yes? Behold the very definition of stupidity!